One of the things I do is I explain stuff. It's a big part of my job. It's a big part of the writing. It's a big part of everything I do. It's probably a lot of what you do as well. And you probably have some experience in ideas like pair programming, mob programming, and swarming. But you also probably have been asked to explain, what's the whole point of this? How could it possibly be efficient? What's the good of this? Isn't this pointless and wasteful? And you've probably had to come up with some crazy answers and some really, really brilliant answers that I need to know because I'm still collecting mine. But I've answered the question many times. So what I'm going to present to you is a part of a talk on collaborative work styles where we start talking about why this all makes sense. And maybe this will help you to either understand why collaborative programming makes sense, if that's a question for you, or at least to explain to others the kinds of problems it's solving. So with that, I suppose we'll get started. So the first problem we're going to get into, let's pop that up here. The first problem we're going to get into is the problem of software complexity. Now, normally this picture is used to explain how everybody has a partial understanding and misunderstanding of things, based on their partial understanding. But I see this as a good thing, right? So my point with the blind monks and the elephant is that systems are too big for you to have the whole thing in your head. Most of us work in areas where the whole system is much bigger than we are, including maybe all of Amazon or all of Google or all of Azure. And so we know bits and pieces. So knowledge is necessarily segmented and distributed. This gives us some strengths and some weaknesses. One of the problems we get is that we are part of a very much larger system, and therefore we have to find some way to cope with the idea that there's a lot of communication going on. There are emails and Slack messages and Teams and Outlook, and just start listing them and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. Because when we only have a piece, we have to over communicate. Right? So other people are going to hear things that are irrelevant to them from us, and we're going to hear things that are irrelevant to us from them, because the information has to go out there somewhere. Because otherwise it's going to be lost in one person's head. And this is a little disturbing and troublesome. Too much, too many apps and channels to monitor. We have to curate our feeds, right? Too many constraints to deal with. If I make a change here, what's the long-term effect in the rest of the system? What other decisions will be affected? What might break? Too many things to know. How many languages and frameworks do you have to have in your head right now to do your work every day? And which ones does your company use that you don't know yet, right? Too many requirement docs, too much work to do, too many skills to acquire, too many events going on at once to keep track of them all. We live in a world that's much bigger on the outside of our heads than on the insides of our heads. Too little time for improving because there are too many interruptions. And this is pretty much a normal Tuesday, yes? Yeah. Well, imagine focusing on fewer things. Imagine if each person didn't have to be an army of one. Imagine that only starting new work was necessary when old work was finished. So you had fewer things in progress. Imagine that work didn't flow backward in your system. How much of a difference could these things make? Well, to help understand that, I've pulled on lean thinking. So here is a value stream map. You've probably seen some of these. Anybody, is this new to you? Most of you, this is not new. Good. So a few things to point out just in case. Work is divided into stations. People work in stations. They work on particular things they understand well. Work tends to process from one station to another. The more important thing is that between those stations are queues or buffers. Things pile up and wait to be processed. And this is better illustrated at the bottom with the lead time ladder. And the lead time ladder shows us some amount of working, some amount of waiting, You see the high marks are weights and the low marks are work. Right? And of course, we can see how many things are waiting by looking at the numbers under the Q or buffer marker that is a triangle. And we will use triangles as we go through. Important things to note. In this one, we see that the weights tend to be measured in days and the work tends to be measured in seconds. And that's usually about the right scale for most manufacturing processes. We get to the idea of flow efficiency. Flow efficiency is total processing time over total time. On this one, we can see that 585 seconds is the processing time over the course of 14 days, 585 seconds. Which suggests that the work spends much, much more time in queues, sitting still, than it does in being processed, which tends to be true in software as well as in manufacturing. Is there any doubt to this? Would you suppose that a piece of work that flows through your system spends much more time being programmed and tested than it does waiting for people? Or would you suppose that lead time from idea to production is maybe also in your world dominated by being in queues and waits between processing steps? Any guesses, suggestions? So we actually did this at one of your local companies once. We sat down and started doing the calculations, which will remain nameless. And we found out that a programming task that takes 2 days took something on the order of 3 months to deliver. Well, why would that be? Well, because it has to be an idea gets put into a pile. The pile gets sorted and prioritized. Some ideas are picked up. They're put into a backlog. Those are going to be treated. Eventually, there's time. You wait. You're going to work on that. Eventually, you're going to get it into a sprint. As a sprint approaches, you're going to pull it out and do an hour's worth of, slicing and grooming. And you're going to put it back in. It's going to sit for days. In the sprint, somebody's going to pull it out, start to do some work on it, right? They do 2 days worth of work. It goes into a queue. It goes into a pile. It's waiting for the next delivery. Well, the next testing and then the next delivery. Eventually, after it's been tested and all, it gets deployed. It's months. Months. 2 days of processing for programmers over the course of several months. We figured it was much less than 5% of the time. The total time it takes to go from concept to cache. Which means that if programmers were able to go twice as fast, it would make a walloping 2.5% improvement in the overall process. Yay! Those programmers clearly need to work faster. Well, that's not nearly fast enough. Well, then we should quadruple processing speed. How much will that help us? A day over 3 months. Well, we should quintuple the speed. That's literally a day over 3 months, right? So, yeah, 1% at that point. It's kind of an exciting idea. So I can see why we want the programmers to work harder and faster. And by the way, every time I've done one of these value stream maps for any customer, programming has been right around 5% of the total time. Now, when you talk to people at the top who don't know any better, you ask them what needs to happen, they'll tell you it's the programmers, they need to go faster. I'm going to suggest that that's exactly what needs not happen. But let's take another look, okay? Let's say that we wanted our programmers to go half as fast instead. But let's put a condition on this, kind of a thought experiment. We find that in corporate shops, typically 60 to 80% of developers' time goes on defects, either from production or from QA. 60 to 80% if you have a live product. Does that sound completely out of bounds? No. Okay. Well, what if by going half as fast we could eliminate all bugs? I know that's a big if, but let's just pretend. Let's pretend that by going half as fast we could take more time and get all the bugs worked out before we deliver. What would be the difference? Would we be slower or faster to market? A quick worked example. At 60% of defects, right, that means that 4 out of 10 days are doing new work and 6 out of every 10 days are fixing. Okay, let's go twice as slow. So we're going to go to 8 days are new work, but 0 days are fixing because there are no bugs. 2 days are left over. If this were so, then by going twice as fast, we would deliver twice as slow, we would deliver 20% faster. Is my math looking good to you? Does that seem ridiculous? That's with the big if that we were eliminating all the bugs, which I'm not going to say that going slow automatically will cause that to happen. But potentially, going twice as slow, we could possibly deliver 20% faster. 20% is a lot to promise. We would probably promise something less. So, again, the problem probably isn't to get programmers to go faster, but to eliminate defects. It's a thought, right? And of course, programming time doesn't matter that much anyway. The next piece is that it takes time for code to cycle between people in departments in organizations. So, in one organization, we found that it takes roughly 7 days for code to go from a tester to the QA department. They had a department. And a defect is found, and for it to be returned to the developer takes about 6 days. Working days. Not calendar days. Cool. Okay, what was the average number of rejections, do you suppose, on a programming item? You'll not believe this part. The average was about a dozen. Yeah, a dozen times 12, or a dozen times 6, sorry, days, a dozen times 6 days. And what do you look at, 72 days just through QA? Now that's pretty extreme. I think most of us are going to see something closer to 3 to 5. I was hoping at that point to hear some people laughing or turning bright red. How long does it take to make a cycle, and how many cycles do you make? Each one adds days to weeks to your schedule for releasing the code. How long did it take to write the code? A few days. How long did it take to circle through QA? A few weeks. So clearly we need to program faster. How many potential cycles does your software create? How many points do people do an inspection with the possibility of rejecting back to the coder? How many of you have less than 4 opportunities to cycle? Okay, let me ask you the scarier part. Are your cycles nested? So if it's rejected by QA and it comes back, does that mean that you are going to wait to pick it up and work on it, and then you're going to send it to pull request where they're going to code review where they might return it, and if it passes, then it might go to QA where they might return it. Afterwards, it may go to a system test where they might return it. And of course, if they return it, it has to go through pull requests and QA again to go back out to. They're nested. Wow. That's a disturbing thought. Is it not? It ought to be. So, if programming was 2 times slower, but it passed all the checks, not only would we be 20% faster, but by not having bugs, we would eliminate loops from our system, which may cut weeks per feature out of everything we do. It's a deep thought. And that's without even, necessarily being amazingly better programmers or being replacing any personnel. Well, there you go. Why are we not faster? Speed of delivery is dominated by the number of loops in the human process, the number and length of the waits in the human process, and surprisingly enough, by the speed of the test suite. The faster your unit tests run, the quicker and more certain your work is. And compared to these, nothing else we do is nearly as interesting. Why? Well, it's because people can't beat the systems they work in, right? So the system you work in is going to limit you. And this is a thing that was recognized by Deming when he said that 94% of variation in workers' performance levels have nothing to do with the workers. They're caused by the system of which the worker is only a small part. This is part of the system of profound knowledge. When was this written? This was not written in 2001 or 1991 or 1981. We're talking the 70s. Yeah. Yeah, so this is something that we should have known for 50 years. But somehow it continues to be ignored. Probably because it puts the blame where we don't want to think the blame lives. So basically, if we could improve our systems, we see. By the way, you notice the recognition here, 94% here. What is about 5% is the programming. So we keep looking at this, you know, these numbers in approximation tend to repeat as we go through these. So any significant improvement has to come by addressing the causes of slowness. If you're going to fix an illness, you have to treat it, you know, an injury, you have to treat it at the point of the injury. If I break my arm, you can't bandage my knee and help me out much. So it's a matter of getting to know. But wait, what about individual performance? Doesn't individual performance matter? Some people are 10x programmers, are faster than other programmers, unquestionably, right? I see mixed responses. Well, some people are faster than others. I'm okay with that. You're okay with that. You've seen it happen. You've been it on one side or the other at some point. Where does that come from? Well, what we found is when I find someone who's incredibly efficient and quick and gets good answers, you know, right off the bat, they're naturally great programmers. They are fluent with their stack. They are fluent with their development and testing tools. They have a good understanding of the local application, and they have seen similar solutions, and therefore they are aware of the designs and issues of similar kinds of programs, which is just experience, right? Those are all important things. There's no substitute for knowing what you're doing. If you're in a stack and you don't know the stack very well, it's probably a good time to dig in. You need to learn that. If you haven't seen an application like your app, maybe it's a good time to go find some and read them. You know, educate yourself. It's good. I'm largely an autodidact. I've been heavily mentored, but you know, it's a thing. You work, you learn. Learning is easily most of the job. But these won't alone solve our system's problems, although if none of us know how to use our stack or our tools, we might have a lot of problems, and probably should address that in HR in the hiring process, and maybe pick out a different other way to work. So how can we improve fluency with tools in the stack, increase our knowledge of the application, and collect other people's experiences without stopping the work? Okay, there was another piece in there. I mentioned the speed of the test suite, and that does matter, and I'll mention why that is, since it's one of the dominant features. Slow tests make us wait. We hate waiting, right? We should run the tests so frequently that the last line of code we wrote is the only new thing in the test suite. So it was okay 2 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago. I made one change, and now it's broken. I bet you I can tell you where that is. Right? It's an easy thing to do. Micro commits and micro tests and fast running tests. When we have slow tests, that discourages frequent use. So I'm going to do some more work before I decide if it's worth waiting for the test run. Once I start making that decision, I'm already losing. Now I'm going to have several changes in, and then when something shows up wrong, it's going to take me more time to figure out why. This is part of the speed problem. Right? Poor fault isolation means long debugging sessions. People talk about how fast they are at coding. I wrote that program in a day and a half. And Why didn't we release it that week? Oh, well, I had to spend 6 days debugging it. Because you tend to count the time you started typing until the first time you stopped typing and thought it was done. You tend not to count all of the time of your debugging and QA and the loops that were made and the pull requests. People tend to forget about that part. It's not pleasant. We don't think about it. We block it out. So slow tests make everything slower, and they make things much worse slower than you would expect them to. Again, we want to not make errors, so we have no returns. Slow tests mean we're going to have more errors, and we may not chase them all. So we want to change the system to be more productive and predictable. Has anyone here heard a manager say that the problem is that the teams are not predictable? We don't know when things are going to be done.
Yep.
I think in the State of Agile report that Rally used, I think it was Rally, right? They used to do, it's like in the top 3 every year that organizations adopt Agile to be more predictable.
By the way, Sten mentioned that he worked at a company where loading the data for the acceptance test took 2 weeks. Yep. I bet you don't do that every day. I'm not going to do that 6 times an hour, am I?
No, I think it was every 3 months or so that we would run the acceptance test for a release. And it better not fail, which of course it did sometimes.
Yeah, now what's your loop like? Oh my gosh, the feedback loop is so slow. So, reduce and eliminate queuing, reduce and eliminate loops and returns, have fast tests, develop more fluent skills. How can I possibly do that? Well, for that we need to think about teams and teaming, because it's a process and a structure. Yeah, we want to be more lean. Well recognized. So let's talk about individual contributors for a while, because everybody knows the most efficient way to produce code is by having each person busy doing the things they do best, and as a result we'll have the application done soonest. We have the maximum amount of work in parallel. Obviously this is going to work. He said, watching the faces falling in the room around him. Okay, well, maybe not so much. There are a couple problems with individual contributors. One is that your learning is individual. So when it is individual, then there are a few opportunities for cross-training. The isolated learning leads to silos. When you need to interrupt someone who has a different specialty than you, it is an interruption. Right? Everybody has their work to do, and now they're dragged away from their work to help you with your work. Right? WIP is very high, so according to Little's law, flow is very low. But I want to not just say that in abstract. I think I want to work some examples and help to explain this clearly. So individual contributors, each person has only what they bring to the table. Clear enough, right? So when we have work to do, we have to take a story and split it up and assign it to individuals based on their individual skills. That just seems efficient, right? So I'm going to take the UX piece to the UX person, the back-end work to the back-end person, the integration work to the integration person, the front-end coding to the front-end coder. I'm going to divide up all the work the way it needs to be divided up to be most efficient, and I'm going to feed that out to all of the people so all their skills get used. And then, as we get close to time for a release, I will gather those pieces back together. They're going to integrate perfectly well, and everything's going to run. And then I can release it. Ideally. It will all fit together at the end. Has anyone seen it consistently fit together at the end?
Ideally is the key word there.
Yeah. Well, this is a little fraught with risk, right? It could possibly not turn out very well most of the time because we're not integrating. And I've actually worked with companies where they had spent 6 months of development time on individual assignments, and they had not yet ever run the software as a system. And as they approached the date that they were supposed to do a dry run on actual equipment with actual users, they had to try to piece the system together and make it run. You can anticipate those are 17-hour days in a row without breaks until they went out and found out it didn't work anyway. So there you go. Well, this is bad enough. And, that's hard. But how often do you actually see only one story or only one epic in flight at a time in a corporate environment? What happens when there are many stories to be divided among many people? So now we have a complex scatter-gather system. When is it going to be done? Well, let's see. 3043 looks like it's a little better than half done. 3045 looks like it's about 2/5 done. But look, 3046 should be done any day now. This, not only is it hard to divide the work up to people according to their abilities, it's really hard to track a whole bunch of partially done pieces for a whole bunch of partially done stories. Scattering many stories at once is a management nightmare. And people try to keep track of it in Jira. Introduced estimation in 5, 4. Yeah, so predictability is poor. Of course, when we put it together, if it has loops, then predictability is even worse. Is it likely to have a flaw that makes it make a loop? Yes, it is. So we've created a system where predictability is essentially impossible. To fix that, of course, the programmers will have to work harder. So the situation that most people find themselves in, and this is fine: increased management and tracking burden, late integration, greater chances of failure, diminished or destroyed predictability, and of course a lot of partially finished work in an unreleasable, unrunnable state. And this is Tuesday afternoon for a lot of people every day. This is fine. I'm okay with the events that are unfolding around me. And they find themselves kind of helpless and hopeless to try to fix it. I know the answer. You guys are just going to have to really support each other better. Work smarter. I don't know. One more piece about the individual contributor problem. Everybody has an entire sprint's worth of work to do, or a release's worth, or a week's worth, whatever your period is. So when somebody needs a piece of help and they call for it, everyone else has to make a decision, weighing the likelihood that their own work won't get done against the cost in case somebody else's work is not done. And of course, what does that mean for the annual review? Because role success is crucial. Role success is more important, by the way, than product success. You can have a bad release, but you can't have a bad review. And I think most people who've worked in management know that you can have a bad product better than you can have a bad review if you want to keep your position. Make the numbers look good. Do the best you can. Another problem with individual contribution is that it isolates the waste, right? Time wasters tend to come to individuals at different times. They're not very observable. So here are a bunch of people who have each wasted 15 minutes on something today. But you know what? It's only me and it's only 15 minutes. It's no big deal. We'll just get through it. How much time was wasted? 15 minutes? No, an hour and a half. We just didn't feel it. We only felt it 15 minutes at a time. How much waste do you suppose goes unnoticed by individual contributors in the course of a month? How many days worth would you suppose accumulated? Yeah, so the unawareness of it is painful. Of course, handoffs. Let's go back to handoffs for a minute. I have a ticket. I need a specialist to look at it. I send them an email. It goes in their queue because, as you know, all specialists are always busy. Great. The queues slow down the flow. It's going to take longer because there's a handoff, there's a queue. Okay, well, Blue's working on that. I'll pull another ticket because I can't be idle. It's not good to be idle. Nobody wants to be caught goofing off. It doesn't look good, doesn't feel good. Nobody went to work to goof off. They all went to work. I'll take another ticket. Great. I've got a ticket. Blue's got one of my tickets. 2 tickets in progress, at least that we can see. Blue finishes. He goes to send it back to me. I've already got a ticket. Now I have 2 tickets in progress. Does that mean they'll get done twice as fast? No, it means they get done half as fast. One of them is going to wait while the other goes. So returning work queues behind current work or pushes in front of current work. Current work goes into the queue. How many tickets at a given time are waiting for human attention? How much work in progress is not actually progressing at a given point? Does anyone want to open up their copy of Jira or whatever the tool is and try to figure out how many things are not actually moving and not actually being tended to at a given point in time? I have worked with teams where they thought it was normal to have over 200 things in flight at a given time on a team of 15 or 20 people. My worst one was where I found a team of over 300 people. The average person was tending to 15 branches. Let you do the math. This is how the system breaks down. This is a system in failure mode. A daily stand-up for 14 hours. Oh, that's pretty good. That's exciting, Stan. Now, interdependence isn't a bad thing, right? It's nice to have specialists. Because, if your town has a really great baker, then you don't need to know how to make bread. They'll make bread. Their bread is better than your bread. It's good to have a specialist handy. And I'm not saying that specialism is wrong, right? Whatever it is that you're a specialist at, that's probably a good thing that you know that stuff and that you're good at it. There is a certain risk to specialism. What happens when Fred the baker is moving or gone or wins the lottery or suffers a problem? Yeah, everybody gets crappy bread or no bread. Yep. So that becomes dangerous to us. So in individual work, all skills and knowledge must be resident in every individual, or you're going to have handoffs, approvals, and queues. When you hear people talk about how we should all be fungible coding units and everybody should know everything, what you're hearing is a response to the fragility of having specialists and silos. Now, is that the answer? Well, it is the only answer if all people must be individually self-sustaining. The pressure is there. With paired programmers, it's a little different. Groups of people take tickets. You know how to do it. I'm going to skip the rules. The advantage, according to studies, over 30% reduction in defects. Time that can be directly folded back into development. Pooling skills. You may have a specialty, but you may pair with people who need your specialty. Right? So every person doesn't have to know everything. Better focus. When you're programming in pairs, you tend to focus on the work. You are more interruptible. If one of you has to be peeled off, the work doesn't stop. When the one person returns, the work has moved forward a step or two. Quicker onboarding. If people don't know the system, they learn the system faster. Developing a common coding style, which you see is not always the first thing that happens with individual contributors. Faster problem solving. They found that people in groups tend to be less certain of their answers, but their answers tend to be right more often. Whereas people who work alone are very certain that they've got a great answer. It just isn't sometimes. The confidence doesn't match the accuracy in either case. We reinforce disciplines. Anthony says to me, do you have a test for that? And I say, oh yeah, we should probably have one of those. Greater awareness of our process. When we hit a weight, we all hit it together, or the pair hits it together. We both are waiting for hours. We're very aware of it. It's worth fixing. And of course, we get better use of our tools in Stack. Anthony knows some particular tricks about C# that I didn't know. I know some things about Writer that he didn't know, the IDE. As a result, we are both 12% faster at the end of the week because we share our most effective habits with each other. There's a whole bunch of stuff here. Of course, find all the articles you want on the benefits. Also, I hate pair programming articles are there. But measure them against what you've learned about systems, and I think you'll have a better perspective. And I kind of want to wrap up fairly quick by taking a look at one other way of working. Of course, I'm going to skip through a whole bunch of things because I really just want to get to the interesting bit. And that is what we've found about swarms. So you've probably done pair programming. You've probably done mob programming. Cool. Well, everybody knows an agile team has, a 1 pizza or a 2 pizza rule. You can only have 7 plus or minus 2 people on a team. Otherwise, it becomes inefficient. Poppycock. You can have huge teams. You can have huge, monstrous, giant teams that work, where everybody actually does know each other. They all do work together well, and things really get done. And what we found is teams with more than 40 members are not even a problem. So you agile at scale people, here's how this works, right? So it's a multi-mob or a swarm team. It's kind of hard if you don't see a picture. So we got a bunch of people. Here's the first user story. Who wants to work on that? 4 people jump in on it. Yay. 4 people are working on that one. Do you need anybody else? No, this looks like probably more than enough. In fact, one of us is just here to learn. Okay, what's the next story? Here's another one. User story 7013. Okay, 5 people want to work on that one. How can that possibly be helpful? Because with 5 people, there are no handoffs and no queues. And by the way, one of them is a QA person who is helping to build the automated tests while we're writing the code. So we're not going to have to loop through QA either. I've just eliminated 3 or 4 queues in one step, and we pulled all the appropriate skills for learning. Here's a defect. A couple people jump on that one. The 3 people who are left pick up 8922. They're going to work on that one. Cool. Easy enough. Now, what about our reserve capacity? What happens if some emergency comes up? There you go. People peel off of their team. They attack the emergency. When it's done, they can return to their teams. And if not, then each team is a little bit smaller, right? So this is a way that is actually pretty good. Do we have a right to expect that we won't be interrupted? No, we don't have that right. Everybody complains about being interrupted, but do they work in a way that allows interruptibility? Probably not, right? But also notice there are fewer things to be interrupted for. There are only 5 tickets in flight, and the entire ticket's in flight at once. It's not been sliced up according to people's individual skills and scatter-gathered, and we've eliminated queues. So the things that actually make us slow are eliminated with this kind of work. Oh, this team finished their work. What do they do now? Anybody? Anybody?
I think they divide back up to the other teams before picking up something else.
That's an option. Like that. Most of the people divided. One person started to do some pre-work on the next story. Wait a minute. Here's a problem. If these teams are forming and unforming and reforming every day, how do we know who's in charge? There are 5 things going on. Normally, we stick our names next to the item on some kind of a workboard. Miro, whatever. Well, which one of them do I talk to? They're all together. Just join their meeting. They put the Zoom link or the Teams room right there. Hop in. Come and ask them. They know. But I need to have an individual's name that I can... Well, why? What's that for? What if they all know it? Okay, let's keep going. Really important meeting comes up. You need to send some people to the meeting. Okay. All the work continues. The work doesn't stop just because somebody's not there. They all return to the meeting. What's something else that can happen? Oh, how about a pandemic? Some people are sick. They're not working on any story today. Or tending to sick people, right? Some people had to work remotely now. Some people were working together. Okay. I'm here. But we did have to change our tooling a bit, right? So some things get finished, people move around, people reform teams. You get a few of them that are finishing. They can take on new work or join existing teams. It's really not that hard to imagine how this would work. And over time, you would end up working with everybody. How many teams do you have in this picture? Well, how many tickets do we have open, right? What if I decide to keep a limit of 4 items in progress? Well, then we need 4 Teams rooms or 4 Zooms. That's pretty much it. What is a team in this case? Well, a team is a group of people who have common goals and outcomes and who all apply their skills toward achieving the thing that they could not do by themselves. The work defines the team, which, as we all know, the task is the reason for the team and always has been. So, skipping ahead a little bit is this. I'm intentionally trying to cut this down so we have time to talk. Be aware that these things are all true. Our efficiency comes from improving the process, the part that's actually wrong, right? We eliminate the loops, eliminate the waits, eliminate the defects because those cause loops and rework. And by doing that, our process, our flow becomes more efficient. The actual amount of processing time over total time goes way up. Our ratio of efficiency is much better. Pooling our knowledge and skills raises the efficiency of the system again because more people are able to contribute in more useful ways at the point of need rather than asynchronously across email and pull requests and what have you. We can be interruptible because we're going to be interrupted anyway, right? And this gets really crazy. Agile talks about self-organizing team. All of these swarms, the people are self-organizing. They're choosing what they're going to work on now. And if at some point they decide that this isn't the place for them, they will join one of the other teams. They have control over their own interests and talents and work through the day. They choose what they work on, who they work with in a responsible and fully accountable manner. And of course, the ultimately important lean concept is that right now we have a system where we're monitoring the workers and keeping the workers busy. And as a result, the work does not flow through the system. Instead, the work goes and jumps and starts and waits and it gets scattered and gathered. The lean people will tell you the first thing is, when you go to the relay race, don't watch the runners, watch the baton. The trick is to get the baton 4 times around the track and across the line. So you want to watch the workflow, not the workers sweat. It seems inefficient. We have 3 people standing and only 1 running. Yeah, that's how we win. That's how relay races are run. So that's pretty much what I wanted to tell you today. That is the short version of a much, much longer talk, as you may have guessed. And I'm going to eventually be able to gather it together. But I think that the most important slide was way back at the beginning when we talked about the dominant factors. And I'm going to bring that back up and leave it on the screen. Back up a little bit more. There. And we'll leave that up while we talk. Thanks for listening to the long form of the talk, short form of the talk so far.
We're
Where's the long form of the talk? Is it on Industrial Logic's YouTube channel?
It is not yet.
Okay.
So this same talk is going to be given a few more times with a few more enhancements and improvements. So your comments are very welcome. I want to take some of the rambliness out of it and make it a bit more focused. One of them is going to be recorded for a company internally. It's a paid talk. Others may be conference talks. So that's an interesting change. So it's not available yet in long form.
Leave the rambling. It creates rapport with people who've been through the same pain. At least me.
Tim,
Drop out.
I'm curious about the swarming stuff. I guess I feel like in some ways you have to have a system that gives you feedback on its state in order for that to really work. Because if it's an unstable system or pipeline or process, you know, that model of working would just create a lot of chaos. But I guess as I'm saying that and as I'm thinking through it, it's like, you know, maybe that's okay, right? Like maybe that's kind of like the pain that you have to go through to get to a stable system in some cases.
Yeah, it turns out it's actually a lot more orderly than it looks. And we use some very simple formalisms. This is one of them. I'll scroll down and find the nice picture. Excuse me. This is a picture of a swarm board. It's a mock-up of an actual one. But what we did is we set up an online board, and we said, well, here's the things that we need to do today. Here's the stories we need to work through. Everybody had their own name card. So this one says Hubert, Engerm, Shashin, there's Kartik and Perry and Chandra and Ken. So everybody has their names, and we just made columns. And this was Team Room 1, Team Room 2, Team Room 3, and 4 in Microsoft Teams. We just made 4 teams. And people drag their names to where they want to be. So you can look at this, and we do screenshots. Every day you can see, you know, we put ticket numbers sometimes in them. Sometimes we don't. But you can take a look and see what's being done. And then when a task is done, it gets dragged out of here and a new task dragged in, and people reconfigure around it. So it's actually super orderly. It's just the stories are larger and more significant. They're not divided up to individual size, so that one person can do it in a half day. They are actual features to be delivered, usually.
And Tim, who decides on the team how many columns are worked and when new things are added versus just consolidating around a fewer number of items?
So what we've done so far is allow the team to decide. So like we would put up the first one, integrate workflow with new API. We put that card up, and then people drag their names over. And if there's people left, we would open up one more column. So we always have the fewest that everybody can work on. And some days we had 2, and some days something came up and we had 5 temporarily.
But is that like who's moving that in? Is it just one of the members of the team?
Yeah. So you've got to prioritize.
Because so many organizations will have like the director or the program manager, or whatever. Like I just want to drive that home, right?
Yeah. It's actually a self-organizing world. The director or product owner has prioritized, because, you know, we're going to run out of time. That's a guarantee. You know, that's what time does. It passes. You eventually run out of it. That's how it is. So the idea is it's prioritized so that when we run out of time, it's the least valuable things we leave out. Right? And of course, any story that hasn't been put into play yet can always be withdrawn or bumped up or down the list. And yeah, when the team finishes something, then they start something new, which, by the way, all alone is a discipline a lot of organizations struggle with. A lot of organizations want to start everything now so we can finish everything, which is exactly how Little's Law tells us not to do it.
Or at least so they can tell somebody else that it's being worked on and their thing is important.
Yeah. Which, by the way, we pay a huge price for that. That costs us so much to tell somebody that something's in progress.
Yeah, but that goes back to your job performance review thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It
So if
cripples the company, but it's a nice thing to tell somebody.
Sorry if I missed this, but had another question about the swarm. It sounded kind of implied, but wanted to clear it up. You're still pulling from one backlog, right? I mean, even with a team of 40 people, it's not as if you're pulling from multiple backlogs into one group, so you can, work around prioritization. You still have to prioritize that one project and pull from that backlog. Okay.
And that's really important, by the way, and I'm glad you brought that up. So these teams had been divided up into groups arbitrarily of 9 or 10 people. And as they were working, they were realizing that every time I am working on a story, I end up crossing over into your area of the application. Wouldn't it be easier if we just all worked on the story together, regardless of what team we're on? And they started doing that, and they became so efficient that the management agreed that they would let them dissolve the team boundaries, which were artificial to begin with. Maru, you have a hand up.
I was looking for the button. Let me first lower my hand. So I try to cluster all my questions into one, and this is it. Yes, otherwise it would be unfair. And so, what do you think? What's your experience about trade-offs between certain areas of specializations and real hard skills, and for the team and for the lean system, work system, advantageous several areas of, let's say, additional skills and their corresponding depths? I don't know if my sentence makes any sense, but I hope it does.
Yeah, so it does. You tend to find people in mobs become more T-shaped. They have some skill in a number of areas, or if you prefer the metaphor, paint drips. So, you run the paintbrush across the screen, it goes deep in several places on the wall. So think about paint runs. You do get that, which tends to be okay. But the interesting piece of it is a lot of people get confused about prerequisites versus outcomes. So they say, well, we can't do this because we don't have a lot of common knowledge, because they think that understanding things the same way among the team members is a prerequisite. In fact, it's an outcome. It's sort of like saying, I can't exercise because I don't have big muscles yet, right? I can't diet because I'm fat. The thing that you get from doing this is you develop the T-shape or paint drip skills. It's not a prerequisite you have to have before entering into this kind of a system. It makes it.
No, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, Tim. Really, definitely not. Please continue.
No, I was finished.
I'm sure I missed on some piece of wisdom now. Anyways, I had a follow-up on that, which is the sense of my question was your experience in the sense of how many areas and how deep. There must be some trade-off there. I mean, there must be a zone where you got too many areas where you had some skills in and not enough depth in the really cool ones that the team needs, and an area where you really get just too deep in one and you're incapable of talking or collaborating with others because you don't have at least a minimum level of depth in some other areas for being T-shaped.
Can I take that one?
Mm-hmm.
There's a fantastic book that I would recommend called Team Topologies, and they talk about ways that you can break up basically enterprises and monolithic software for fast flow. And what they talk about is that most teams should be what Tim is describing. So they call them stream aligned teams. So they're aligned to value streams, and they should be, a mix of generalists with specialists on, on the teams, but really everybody is contributing to everything. But they do say in very special cases where very deep niche knowledge is needed to be successful. And of course, I forget the name of the team, but they have a name for this team.
The complicated subsystem.
Thank you, Anthony. The complicated subsystem team. And I think they give like facial recognition or something where you need like PhDs or very, very deep knowledge. You can build a team around them, but it's like you make that as small as possible, and then they become like their customer is the teams that call them. Yeah. But it's about identifying what those are and making them as small as possible and as few of those in your systems as possible. And I think they even say, like, in most situations, you probably don't need any of those, but in certain niches you might. But it's like the goal is to minimize those as much as possible, and they become like a service to the other teams that use them.
But do monitor that, right? Because when you have that, you're also going to eventually start having trade-offs and queues.
Exactly.
And you need to know when you need to break that out.
I read most of the book. I was really looking for, the book doesn't give you any, even if they claim getting it from practice or research, there is no research behind that. Nobody gives you any ranges of numbers. For example, look, you got to at least have 1 or 2 deep areas, and you can have between 3 and 5 for that particular kind of team.
There are no silver bullets.
Very generic. But
it depends on the system, and it depends on the product, and it depends on the skill set of the team members.
Yeah, everything depends on everything. But at some point, if you talk about certain topologies, it means, you came up with those topologies, you must have an idea of ranges at least. Nobody asks for silver bullets or precise numbers. Nobody says you got to have 2.75 deep areas and 3.83 this one.
I felt like that's what you were asking for.
No, that's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for ranges from practice. You can, if you have an example, you got to have some expertise in that example, at least in that example, without having any general rule of, hey, in that example, people had 2 or 3 basic areas. I mean, I did enough platform strategies to know that at some point to set up a system or a team or platform, you got to give them at least some guidelines to start from, something to strive for. But anyway.
So how would you define that for a company that's trying to build a social networking platform versus a company that's trying to build a financial software? I feel like the ranges could vary,
That's the whole point. They can vary. They will vary. They have to vary.
So why give guidance on it? I feel like that's not going to help anybody. The idea is that you have to define them and explore them and experiment on them inside of their systems that you have.
Yeah. They're application and domain specific. That's the whole point of the question. I mean, if you got an example or a domain or an area, there is some reality there. So if you work there, you got to know it.
So for my teams, we have I don't think we have anybody that has more than 8 people on it. Our platform team has 2 currently, but we're expanding it to 4. Our UX team has 2. We're expanding it to 3. Our content team has 5. Our security team has 4. So there's some numbers around what we do in KBRA. I'd be happy to talk more about it.
And also realize that you don't have to be right to begin with. You just have to become right eventually.
Exactly.
So if you have a skill that you need on your team and only one person has that will become apparent fairly quickly because they'll start to develop a queue around them. Right? And so what you do is you keep an eye on your queues. This work isn't flowing because Scott is working at the bottleneck. By the way, Scott is not the bottleneck. A person is not the bottleneck. A person is at the bottleneck. If Scott was the bottleneck, we would have to get rid of Scott. But Scott is working at the bottleneck. The bottleneck is people need the skill and only Scott has it. So what we need to do is relieve the bottleneck. Well, how can we do that? Can we bring in another person with that skill? Can we transfer the skill? Can we do both? Can Scott take on an apprentice and can we bring in another Scott? We have 2 Scotts right here on my screen side by side, so I'm sure that'll work. Yeah, so you monitor your queues, and when queues start to form and when work is impeded by the the lack of a skill, you just balance the line. And if you can't, then you just slow everything else down so that the crucial constraint is respected. So if we can't go any faster without hiring another Scott, and we can't hire another Scott, then slow everything else down. because you're not going to get anything out faster anyway. Critical Chain, in case you're a Gold Rat fan. That's the book. It's not, none of that's easy, you know, and the whole culture change from keeping people busy to keeping the work flowing is hard. And you'd be amazed how much work it is to get people to finish something before starting something else. So, you know, I don't pretend that any of this is easy, but it's conceptually simple at least.
Do you see, I guess a question on the, you mentioned pairing, mobbing, swarming, right? So do you, are they graduations or like, or maybe the question really is, do you find teams that pair can more easily step into mobbing and teams that mob can more easily step into swarming, or?
So I thought this was a really great definition when I heard it. Someone told me that pair programming is kind of like going on a date, whereas mob programming is kind of like going to a party with your friends. The social pressures are very, very different, right? So I find that mobbing is the gateway drug. And if you can do mobbing, then you can do pairing well, and you can do swarming well. But you kind of need to start off with mobs. Just as an emotional, human, cognitive kind of thing. That's my experience. Other people's may differ.
I mean, that's interesting. My professional experience started with pairing, so maybe that's why I'm biased towards it. But it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It's a different set of social and professional cues that are needed that you can definitely take into pairing that maybe you don't get the inverse of.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting, right? In a pair, all the pressure's on you, right? But only one person is seeing you make mistakes. Compared to a mob, when you do put yourself out there, you probably don't have to put yourself out there as often, but more people are going to see it. So I feel like there is like a trade-off there between those two. I guess it depends on the comfort level of the existing team, how well they know each other already.
Yeah, there's something to that. So if we're going to pair program, Mark, and you and I have bad blood in the past, that's a certain situation, right? Or if we're going to pair and I hit on you in the past, right? Or if we're going to pair and you know that politically I'm highly, you know, diametrically opposed to your, or maybe I'm impatient, or I'm lazy, or, you know, there's a whole bunch of different ways that pairing can go wrong because it's just you and one other person. It could be worker, rester, you know, they might end up being a voyeur programmer where, you know, you're expected to sit and watch them program, you know, exhibitionist programmer, or a voyeur programmer, right? They just want to sit and watch you program. When you're in a pair program situation, the hazards are much greater. In a mob programming situation, if one of them is playing Donkey Kong, everybody's going to notice. Does anybody remember Donkey Kong? You improve your chances of having good partners by having more people in the mob, and you increase your chance of having a very unpleasant interaction by having only two. Also, are you intimidated by the person you're pairing with, right?
Yeah, I like that you don't have to be on all the, like to the full degree all the time, like you do in pairing a lot of times.
Oh, Mario, that was very good. Did you guys see the comment in the notes? In a pair, your chances might be higher that other people in the team see what you are saying actually makes sense and is smart. Whereas if you're pairing with someone with a more experienced person, the chances he will be able to get out of his biases and see the use and innovation of what you're saying is normally way lower. You know, how quick are people to go into judgment instead of considering your ideas?
Yeah.
Mob.
I wrote that because I used to be the most experienced person, and I had a wake-up call 10 years ago, and I started seeing that what I was defining as being experienced in intelligence was actually the impediment towards it. And I had to start developing not only coaching skills, but also meta level problem solving skills. Being able to solve the problem what I have, and then being able to get out of the problem solving brain of mine to think about other ways to solve the problem and combining both. What is that?
I can almost get it focused.
Which is the reason why I was asking about is that a question mark?
Yeah, it's curiosity over judgment. Most
Yeah.
important professional skill anybody can learn.
Easier said than done, yeah. But which is the reason why I was asking about the ranges in terms of skills that somebody would have. For example, being a very strong architect and a very strong security person and a lot of experience in governance, with some additional skills in design and in testing and some business knowledge. That would be a good profile. And then when does it start to be way too much to have 10 side skills and not be deep enough in the ones that actually matter? Which is always it will strongly depend on the project or the team or the company or the product.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, and you know, it's a real hard thing to answer in the abstract. Yeah, I think it will only have very specific applications. You'll have to see.
Which is the reason why I started in one of the teams. I didn't do it in many others. A skill map for people to fill up automatically, and we used it to use participatory budgeting for the training budget for people. And so everybody had a look on the skill map, the skill proficiency map, where people place themselves and put themselves. And it also had people see how much bias was in their own self-assessment on those skills. And that was actually a visual representation of how the skills distribution in the team was. And we each in the team, we defined our skill proficiency levels. We started with just 3, and then we had to increase the granularity to depending on the skill to up to 10 even. Some skills only had 5 proficiency levels, some skills had 10. And that allowed everybody on the team to visually know who was where in terms of skills, as let's say as a consensus by the whole team. And some people even used it as a map to track their own progress and ambition. And we even used it as you can't say I'm at skill. I have 10 skills. I'm way too scattered. Maybe we need to agree on certain skills that you want to pursue and make some tough choices.
I worked with a team once. I'll try to make the story not too long. I worked with a team once, and we came to the end of the first 2 weeks, and they said, we're going to have a retrospective. I said, well, you guys are doing Scrum. That's part of Scrum. Oh, God, we've had so many of them, and we hate them. For God's sake, please don't do the sailboat. Please don't do the airplane. Don't do the 4 Ls. Don't do this and don't do that. We're just so sick of it. It doesn't make any difference. We're just tired. I said, okay. So we walked into the room, and I handed them each 2 sticky pads. I think they're like blue and yellow. And I said, on the blue one, write a skill that you wish you had that would have saved you some time this month. And then on the yellow one, write down a skill that you used that saved you some time this month. And then we put all the blues on one side and all the yellows on the other side. And we looked at them and lined them up. And it turns out for everybody who's like, man, I really wish I knew more about unit testing. There was somebody who said, my unit testing skills saved me a lot of time. So we started just connecting up the skills the team already had and the people who already needed them. And the next, the assessment, when we finished, the action items were, so-and-so is going to show us how to do such and such. I'm going to pair with so-and-so. They're going to pair with them, and that was it. That was our entire retrospective. It took 15 minutes and everybody was faster and happier the next period. So, hey, there's a hand up.
Hey, Tim. I guess first off, thanks for coming back. It's always a pleasure hearing you speak. I guess I was hoping to get your thoughts on, pairing versus mobbing and swarming when it comes to acclimating new members to the team. Like personally, I'm very familiar with pairing and the advantages there, but very little exposure to how mobbing and swarming would help there.
I find that the fastest way for people to learn in the whole world is mobbing. And
Really?
people will come to know the team members by face and by name and by skill so fast with mobbing. I don't know anything that's even close to it. And pairing and swarming aren't even that close to it.
Wow. I guess off the cuff, it feels a little counterintuitive just from the one-on-one nature you get with pairing.
Yeah.
You know, I guess everyone learns differently too. So
Yeah, but it seems like so far pretty much everybody's learning each other and how to work so much faster in the mob that I can't even see individual differences anymore. It's disturbing. And you remember this, we got together and we started an engagement by doing a series of real work workshops. And a real work workshop was just, Scott remembers this too. We got together and mob programmed all day. It was too many people in a mob. It was like ridiculous huge. If I remember, it's like 20 people. It's really unwieldy. But I think that we all learned each other and picked up the skills and disciplines pretty fast that way. And of course, after a couple of weeks, we stopped doing it with that big of a mob because it was nuts.
Yeah, I think there was one that was very big because we combined 2 teams for one.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you say that was a quick learning experience?
Yeah, I think, and my experience with it was how long it takes to learn how to do test-driven development and be comfortable with it and want to stick with it when you are. So one, I tried to do it by myself before I joined an XP team. That was a failure. Or was not a successful experiment, I should say. And then doing it on a team in pairing, which was successful but took longer. I've watched those teams when you have the group there supporting each other with an expert kind of in that mob. They definitely picked it up quicker, stuck with it quicker, and worked through challenges. Whereas, like, I think typically if you're working by yourself or in a pair, you'd be more likely to kind of go back, get frustrated. I don't know how to do this. I'm not comfortable with this. So I'll go back to my old way of working, especially when you have deadline pressure or pressure to finish your work in the time that you said you would. So yeah, I think definitely witnessed firsthand people picking up those skills a lot faster in the mobbing sessions.
Yeah.
Okay, add me to that list. I couldn't pair program. I couldn't do unit test. I couldn't do TDD. I tried it, never worked over multiple years. We did mobbing with industrial logic. We did mobbing, and about 2 weeks, it all started to make sense. Something about being in the mob and everyone being able to fill in those gaps that I didn't have just made the learning experience so much faster. And then after that, things like pairing became easy. It was no longer a challenge because the mobbing kind of set expectations and taught me all the things that I didn't understand before.
Yep. One of the kind of also amazing thing is, you notice if you watch Woody Zool, Hunter Industries in general, they have all these videos about their mob programming, and you'll find that they are taking an hour out of every day to work on their skills together every morning before starting the actual work. And you think, how can anyone tolerate that? That's an entire team's worth of people all losing an hour a day. It's because they make back much more time than they lose. So, yep. So Bob Martin taught you. By the way, Bob Martin was twice my boss. I've had a really weird career. So I worked for Bob Martin 2 different times. I once worked for Ian Murdoch, who is the Ian in the word Debian, as in Debian Linux. He founded that distribution. I worked with the team that built the system that did the visual imagery for Elizabeth Taylor's brain surgery. And I worked with the people who made the black boxes for the Boeing airplanes and many others. So it's been a weird career. I should tell you some of the mentors I've had that's just been ridiculous and cool.
All right, great. Well, we're coming up on time. Really appreciate your time today, Tim.
Hey,
Thank you for coming back and speaking with us.
Yeah. And thank you all for hanging out with me and asking questions and participating.
Yeah. Thanks for the conversation with everyone else too. It was great. Love to hear all the perspectives.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yep. And don't forget, so next month we have Diana Larson, so please come back and see what she has to say.
Don't miss Diana. She's the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's awesome. And bring your questions.
All right, take care, everybody. Thanks for coming. Hope to see you again soon.
Nice to see you.
He's already left. Okay. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care. I'm gonna drop, so I'm probably gonna lose you guys.
Okay.
You want me to hand off control to somebody? Because I'm gonna start getting Luca ready.
Who's even left?